any right-wing, far-right protester landing up in jail, they can expect a pretty cold reception from what he says are Asian gangs inside prison who will be looking out for them.
Okay, I want you to just think about what that guy said there. He said any right-wing or far-right protester. That's what he said. He didn't say rioter. He didn't say murderer. He didn't say rapist. He didn't say criminal. He said protester. Now, that's the important point in this. I've looked at the footage. A lot of this relates to Downing Street and what happened on the 31st of July, that fateful Wednesday. I'll put the link, when I put this video out, I'll put the link in the description below to my live stream. And I wasn't there. Many of you know, I live in Northern Ireland. I get across to England when I can for demos and events and to try and do what I can to help with the cause. But I wasn't there that Wednesday. But I watched the footage, and I watched it from several different angles, and I made a live recording that night, and in real time. The Daily Telegraph did a fantastic stream. There's other people on the ground there as well doing a really great job with streams. But what I saw was, yes, there was a bit of pushing and shoving, but that happens at a lot of demos, happens at a lot of events. Things get a little bit out of hand, it gets calmed down, nothing major. There was not a riot in Downing Street. There was some stupid stuff done, no doubt about it. But on the whole, there wasn't a riot. And a lot of these guys that have been arrested and charged with violent disorder did nothing more than shout at the police. And they're getting 2 years in prison. And I want to put this in context now. These Asian gangs that whoever that guy on Sky News was, I've never seen him before, don't know who he is, he's irrelevant. But it was almost like he was gloating about what was happening in the prisons. So I want you to think about someone like, I keep mentioning him because it sticks in my mind, David Spring. He's a few years older than me, 61 years old. And he's retired, train driver, totally clean record. He cares for his sick wife. He's been banged up for 18 months. Now, what that reporter or journalist, whoever he was on Sky News said, if that had been any other circumstance, can you imagine? Can you imagine if it had been, well, those Asians that were rioting, they better watch out because there's a lot of white gangs in those prisons and they're going to give them a hard time, which is pretty much what was said. Makbar Akbunji, you know who I'm talking about, the jihadi lawyer. He said something very, very similar. He said, well, if you sing hurty words about Allah, you've got a long time in prison to think about that. And what's really going on here is the jihadi gangs that run these prisons, that force people to take the mat, in other words, convert to Islam. Those jihadi gangs are going to torment, torture, and possibly seriously injure or kill some of those protesters. There is a high chance of that. Let's just be honest about this, because when violence starts, there's always unintended consequences, and maybe some of them will want to kill the prisoners that have gone on these wings. And again, I've heard reports, and I'm not going to go into any more detail, but I've heard reports that some really good lads that aren't scared of anything, are in those prisons in fear of their lives. They're outgunned, they're outnumbered. These are lads that have either never been in trouble or they've not been in trouble for years. They're lads that can look after themselves, but they've got good jobs. They're builders, they're bricklayers, they're plumbers, painter and decorators. Just normal people. Just normal, proper, salt-of-the-earth, working-class people. They've been banged up by the Starmer regime for shouting at a few police officers. And we've seen the footage. We've seen people being picked out of the crowd and dragged out of the crowd for what appears to be absolutely nothing. And when you've done a lot of demonstrations, I've done a lot of demos down through the years, and sometimes it gets very heated, and sometimes there's words going backwards and forwards between demonstrators of different sides, between the police and demonstrators, and vice versa. That's the reality when things get a bit heated. Now, I looked at that footage on Downing Street, and I did not see any police officer getting seriously hurt or seriously injured. Yes, there was some stupid carry-on went on, for sure. One, there shouldn't have been a march down to Parliament Square, in my opinion. That's by the by, okay? But the police action after that was absolutely outrageous, without a shadow of a doubt. Absolutely outrageous. Arresting people arbitrarily, arresting women. If you're there with a woman and she gets arrested, do you think you're just going to stand there and let a woman get dragged off by the police? Whenever a police officer attacks a woman, there's a visceral response from any man that either sees it or is there when it happens. So what's happened since the Downing Street event is, without a shadow of a doubt, political policing, political judiciary. Two-tier doesn't even come into it. This is totally political. This is an attack on centre-right patriots who care about their country, who care about mass immigration, who care about illegal immigration, who care about knife crime. And incidentally, the biggest victims of knife crime are black people. But it just so happens that the white working class care about black people as much as they care about people of their own skin colour. And that's a fact. I've been about this movement for 7 years. There are some racists on the very, very far extremes. They're always shunned. They're always pushed out. They're always told to sling the hook. The vast majority of people in our movement have lots of friends from lots of different backgrounds. They have multiracial families, multiracial friends. And yet they're going in prison. And from what I've heard, they're being tormented by prison officers, by gangs within the prisons. This is a national scandal, and it's on Keir Starmer and his regime. And let's be honest, I cannot even speak about what I think of these judges and their conduct. I can't even speak about them. The show trials. This is like something from communist Russia in the 1960s, 1950s, 1970s, 1980s. Pick your date. It's like what you see in North Korea, where someone gets dragged out of the crowd in the middle of a Politburo meeting and shot in the face. And let's be serious about this. These guys' lives are in danger when they're in these prisons with the jihadi gangs, and they've been thrown to the wolves. And apparently, they're not letting them all stay on the same wing. They've deliberately separated these guys. Now, I always go back to Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, when that happened, it was a recipe for absolute disaster. People were killed on the wings in Northern Ireland, in places like the Crumlin Road, when there wasn't segregation. And eventually, the prisons in Northern Ireland ended up completely segregated. Crumlin Road was a big, old Victorian prison, and there wasn't segregation in there. And they actually went through the prison walls to get at each other in the Crumlin Road. We have now a situation in England where there are political prisoners on those blocks. People that went, I want you to think about the motivation of the men and women that went to Downing Street on the 31st of July. They went there because they cared about those little girls that had been slaughtered. They cared. They cared about their children. They cared about Ariana Grande. They cared about Borough Market. They'd seen it all. They've seen it play out over the past 10, 15 years. They care about the little girls that have been raped by the grooming gangs. They care about the attacks that have gone on from people that came into the country illegally, and they have happened. And if you want me to go and get the stats, I'll go and get the stats so you can fact check them. There are people been murdered by illegal migrants. We think about the case up in Hartlepool. And of course, it's all nothing to see here. Don't look over there. Don't look at what's really happening. They were sickened by the anti-Semitism of the Hamas hate marches. They were sickened by foreign nationals taking over our streets, waving foreign flags. Sickened by the left. Sickened by people like you, Keir Starmer. And we've got to put up with 5 years of this regime. And again, I'm not justifying violence. Where violence has been done, people pay the price. If you cross that line and you get into violence, you pay the price. It's as simple as that. That's just the way it is. But the issue is here. There's a lot of men and women in prison now, up and down this country, facing goodness knows what, locked away, their freedom gone, their safety gone, their security gone, many of them their jobs gone, for doing nothing than speaking, for saying hurty words about Allah, for saying hurty words to police officers. And now that's violent disorder. It gets you 18 months. Really? And you're telling me there's not a two-tier policing system? You're telling me this is justice? This is no justice. This is no justice. But the difference with us, when we say there's no justice, we don't say no peace. We are a peaceful movement. We're not going to start rioting. We're not going to start burning. We haven't done that. We've kept our events completely peaceful. Even despite massive provocation, we've put ourselves in harm's way to keep them peaceful. But what's happening in this country is reprehensible. It's disgusting. And it's got to be called out. And I will call it out. I'm not going to sit by and watch my friends and people that have walked with me and people that stood me. I'm not going to keep my mouth shut when people I know are getting dragged off to prison for nothing other than shouting and saying hurty words about a false god and about fake police officers. Anyway, let's just hope and pray that nobody gets hurt that's gone behind the door. That these guys that have got 18 months when their wives are outside ill. You know, there's 2 instances, there's 3 or 4 instances actually. There's a guy I think he's in his early 40s. And he's been put in prison. He cares for his partner. He's a carer. This 61-year-old guy, he cares for his wife. That's his job. He's a carer. He's retired and he was looking after his wife. And do you know what? He cared about the kids enough to go to Downing Street on the 31st. And then that woman up in Cheshire, quiet woman, she'd just been on the internet. She said some stupid stuff and she's been taken away from a 76-year-old ill husband. What if they never see each other again, Keir? Do you care about that? Did you prove your point as you're locking pensioners up, you sick twat? Oh, guys, I'm not going to say any more. I'm going because there's nothing more I can say. But this government's a disgrace. Shame on you. You vile, disgusting scum. Shame on you for what you've done to the British people. You are despised. You are hated by the British working class. And you know what? We can't wait for the next election because you'll be destroyed in the next election. You'll be wiped out like the Conservatives were. But, right, I'm going.